My name is Emily Carter. If anyone had ever met my husband and me in that suburban neighborhood, they probably would have said I was a lucky woman. We lived in a 2-story house with a small front porch, a lawn that was always neatly trimmed, and on weekends, the smell of something baking would sometimes drift out from the kitchen. I had a steady job, and Ryan did too. We went grocery shopping on Friday nights, paid our bills on time, went to summer barbecues with the neighbors, and took family photos at Thanksgiving like so many other middle-class families in America. From the outside, everything looked so complete and polished that it put other people at ease on our behalf. Ryan Carter was very good at creating that feeling. He knew how to pull out my chair in front of other people, how to smile at exactly the right moment, how to say the kind of things that made my friends laugh and then turn to me and say, "Emily, you really picked the right man." Ryan remembered anniversaries, remembered what kind of wine I liked, and even remembered the name of the new neighbor's dog. He was so courteous that he seemed almost perfect. And it was because of that perfect image that it took me a very long time to call what was growing inside my marriage by its real name. I used to tell myself that every marriage has its dark corners. Two adults living together can't always stay soft and effortless the way they look in photos online. Some months, the electric bill spikes. Sometimes work made both of us short-tempered, and there were stretches when we sat through dinner looking at our phones longer than we looked into each other's eyes. I thought that was just the ordinary erosion of daily life. I also told myself not to ask for too much, because Ryan was still the kind of husband everyone agreed was decent and responsible. But as time went on, I began to see that Ryan cared about money in a way that felt colder than a man simply trying to provide for his family. He was sensitive about reputation, about credit scores, about account balances, about what other people thought of his ability to manage money. Ryan could spend hours comparing interest rates, savings funds, and tax deductions. If it had stopped there, I probably would have gone on believing my husband was just careful. What unsettled me was the way he talked about insurance. Ryan brought up insurance so often that it started to feel strange. Car insurance, home insurance, health insurance, and life insurance. In conversations that seemed perfectly ordinary, he would ask what I thought about death benefits, accident payouts, rider clauses, and if the insured person died in some unexpected incident. I still remember one time, when I was washing dishes, I gave an awkward little laugh and asked why he was suddenly so interested in such a grim topic. Ryan answered in a tone so matter-of-fact it chilled me. Adults are supposed to know how to turn risk into value. At the time, I felt uncomfortable, but I still told myself he was just being overly practical. Then one afternoon, everything started to slip beyond the range of explanations that felt safe to me. I was checking my email for the electric bill when I saw a confirmation notice about changes to a life insurance policy under my name. At first, I thought it was spam. But when I opened it, I saw that the payout amount had been raised dramatically far higher than the policy Ryan and I had vaguely discussed more than a year earlier. The email included the confirmation code, the update timestamp, and a valid electronic signature. Everything had been handled so neatly that it looked as if someone had planned every step so no one would be able to question it. I sat in front of the screen in silence for a few minutes, then printed the whole thing out. When Ryan came home, I placed the stack of papers on the kitchen table and asked him why my policy had been changed without my clearly knowing anything about it. I was waiting for an explanation, or, at the very least, an apology for deciding on his own about something tied to my life and my identity. Ryan looked at the papers, looked at me, then let out an irritated breath as if I were the one causing trouble. "Emily, why are you messing with things you don't understand?" For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. I told him the policy was in my name, it involved me, and I had a right to know. Ryan pulled out a chair and sat down, his voice dropping lower, even, controlled. "I'm looking out for this family's future. You're too emotional to understand how these things work." That sentence stopped me cold. It was the first time I truly felt that in Ryan's eyes, I was not his wife. I was an asset inside a plan he believed he had every right to arrange. Dinner that night took place in an atmosphere so tense it was hard to breathe. The sound of knives and forks touching the plates seemed sharper than usual. I tried to keep my voice calm as I asked about everything one by one, from the electronic signature to the increased payout, from who had contacted the insurance company to why he had never clearly discussed any of it with me. Ryan kept eating, calm as ever, occasionally looking up at me with a gaze that sent a cold shiver down my spine. "You should learn to trust your husband instead of acting like an outsider," he said. I answered him, for the first time, without backing down. "Trust does not mean handing over my life for someone else to decide." Ryan set his fork down very gently. It was that gentleness that made it frightening. "You're blowing this out of proportion, and I'm advising you to stop before you turn something simple into something ugly." I couldn't eat another bite. My whole body felt hollow then, as if something inside my mind had just shattered, and I hadn't even had time to bend down and gather the pieces. That night, after I cleaned up the kitchen, I walked past the garage to get a bottle of detergent I had left inside. The light cast only a thin yellow line through the crack of the half-closed door. I heard Ryan talking on the phone, his voice lower and more decisive than usual. "Yeah, but it has to be clean. Everything has to look like an accident." I froze behind the door, my hand so cold I nearly dropped the plastic bottle onto the floor. In that moment, a horrifying thought rose so clearly in my mind that I could no longer lie to myself. Maybe Ryan didn't just want to control me. He wanted me gone. The next morning, I still made Ryan coffee like I always did, still asked if he'd be home for dinner, still nodded along to things that sounded normal on the surface. I played the role of a wife who knew nothing so well that I disgusted myself. The moment Ryan left, I locked myself in the bathroom, sat down on the cold tile floor, and started checking everything I could check: email, banking apps, the insurance portal, even the digital archive folders I had barely touched before, because I had trusted that my husband would never hide anything major from me. The more I searched, the colder my hands became. In the section for insurance benefit changes, some forms had been updated weeks earlier. Ryan was listed as the primary beneficiary. The policy value had increased sharply. What made me nauseous was the electronic signature in my name. It appeared there neatly, valid, in the proper format, as if I had personally approved everything. I stared at the timestamps and tried to remember what I had been doing on those days. One day, I had been at my mother's all afternoon. One day, I was stuck in back-to-back meetings. One day, my phone had been sitting on the kitchen counter, dead. Not once had I opened that file. I cleared the access history, logged out of every account, and still didn't feel safe. I got in my car, parked in a far corner of a supermarket lot a few blocks from home, and went through everything again from the beginning. The sense of violation no longer had anything to do with money. Someone had used my identity to prepare for a future in which I did not exist. The documents sat motionless on the screen, and yet I felt as though they were breathing, closing in on me, turning my existence into a number that could be converted into a payout. Just as I was about to call a lawyer I knew from my old company, my phone rang. A woman on the other end introduced herself as Madison from the insurance company's verification department. Her voice was professional, but there was a strange hesitation when she said my name. She said she just needed to confirm a small detail regarding a recent adjustment request. I kept my voice steady and asked which request. Madison hesitated for a second, then said my husband had contacted them several times to speed things along because the family wants to complete everything as soon as possible. I asked what Ryan had been calling about. Madison answered carefully, like someone who knew she was stepping into sensitive territory, but in the end, she still let enough slip to leave me frozen. Ryan had asked about payout timelines if the insured died in an accident. He had asked which situations counted as unexpected risk. He had asked how the verification process could be shortened. I gripped the phone so tightly my hand hurt, and I heard myself let out a short, brittle laugh that no longer sounded like laughter at all. After the call ended, I sat motionless in the car for a long time. That was the moment I stopped lying to myself that this was just a misunderstanding between husband and wife. That evening, I tried to test Ryan. I didn't come at him with accusations. I simply asked why my insurance policy had been changed without anything being clearly explained to me. Ryan looked up from his computer screen, his expression calm in an almost frightening way. He did not look flustered at all. Instead, he asked what exactly I had seen, in the tone of someone measuring a threat, not a husband trying to explain himself. I said my name had been used on documents. Ryan leaned back in his chair, one corner of his mouth lifting. Emily, you always overreact to everything. You're hopeless with financial matters. If I stepped in to handle it, what exactly is wrong with that? I looked straight at him, trying to force him to face how serious this was. I didn't sign it, so who signed for me? Ryan laughed, and the sound of it seemed to drop the temperature in the kitchen. Whether you signed it or someone else did, the result is the same if I'm the one carrying this entire household. Some things you should be grateful for instead of questioning. That answer made me realize something even more terrifying than the policy itself. Arguing with Ryan would not help me uncover the truth. It would only tell him how much I already knew. 2 days later, while Ryan was in the shower, his main phone was on the table and his car keys had been carelessly left beside the sink. I opened a side compartment in the garage, one he rarely let me touch, and found another phone. It wasn't locked. In the call log, one name appeared over and over again. Cole Bennett. Not family, not a coworker, not any friend I had ever heard Ryan mention. There were messages so short they were chilling. Wait for the signal. Old location. Has she gone out alone yet? I had just started taking pictures of the screen when I heard the door inside the house open. I shoved the phone back where I found it and shut the compartment just before Ryan came down into the garage. From that day on, everything around me changed. The sound of the garage door rolling down made me jump. A man lingering too long by a gas station counter was enough to send my heart racing. I started changing my route to work, checking the rearview mirror more often than the road ahead. I hated that feeling, the feeling of being hunted inside, the very life I had once thought was safe. That afternoon, after leaving the supermarket with 2 bags of random groceries to keep up the appearance of normalcy, I noticed a gray sedan idling in the distance. When I turned right, it turned right. When I slowed at a yellow light, it slowed too, keeping the same distance. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, until the car followed me through 3 streets in a row, even taking the longer loop most people in the neighborhood never used. When I turned onto the road leading home, the sedan was still behind me, patient as a shadow. At the end of the street, it slowed and stopped beneath the trees across from my fence. I sat there, numb, both hands clamped around the steering wheel until they went stiff. And for the first time, I understood with perfect clarity that I may have entered the stage where one single mistake would mean I would never get the chance to finish telling this story. I waited until Ryan's car had completely disappeared at the end of the street before I pulled the curtains shut, took out my phone, and opened the doorbell camera app. I had already looked through it once in a state of panic, but this time I forced myself to stay calm. I scrubbed through every frame from the days I came home late from work, the afternoons I stopped by my mother's place, even the day I had a doctor's appointment. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Then I saw him. Ryan was standing right on the front porch, but not with the easy, casual posture he used when accepting a package or chatting with a neighbor. His shoulders were drawn in, and he kept glancing sideways toward the street, as if he was afraid someone might see him. The man standing in front of him was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a cap pulled low. They spoke for less than a minute, but the way Ryan slipped something that looked like an envelope into the man's hand sent a sheet of ice down my spine. There was no polite handshake, no casual familiarity, just the secrecy of 2 people exchanging something that could not be witnessed. I rewound it and watched again, then zoomed in on the man's face. The image broke into pixels, but it was still clear enough for me to make out the line of his jaw and the way he moved. I opened the screenshot from the spare phone, the one where the name Cole Bennett had flashed across the screen after midnight and then disappeared. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. That name was no longer a vague suspicion on a screen. He had been standing at my front door, on the same steps where I set out seasonal flower pots, the place I had once thought was the safest part of my life. I was no longer sitting there like a wife trying to understand her husband. I was sitting there like someone piecing together evidence to find out how much time she had left. The first person I thought of was Sarah Mitchell. We had been friends since before I ever met Ryan. Sarah wasn't the type to panic easily, and she definitely wasn't the type to exaggerate things for drama. When I sent her the screenshots, the copy of the insurance policy, and the notes I had made about the late-night call, she called me back immediately. Her voice was low and tight, with no wasted words. "Emily, where are you? At home, lock the doors, back up everything, send me a copy, and send another one to a new email account. Do not confront Ryan. I started crying when I heard her say that last part. Not because I was weak, but because for the first time, someone had heard the whole story and didn't tell me I was probably overthinking it. Sarah was quiet for a few seconds, then said, each word landing in my head like a nail being driven in. If you're wrong, we lose a few days checking. If you're right, you're living with a man who could kill you. That sentence ripped away the last layer of self-deception I had left. After my call with Sarah, my mind suddenly cleared most terrifyingly. All the things I had brushed aside because I couldn't bear to suspect my own husband came rushing back one by one. The time my brakes made that shrill wrong sound, even though the car had just been serviced. The day I walked into the kitchen and smelled gas so strong it caught in my throat. Ryan had casually said I must have forgotten to turn it off. The time the floor near the stairs was slick, almost shining, as if something had been spilled there, and I slipped while carrying a basket of laundry and nearly fell. Even my allergy medication, one time the box had been moved to a different compartment, and the pills looked identical, but tasted different. Back then, I told myself I was just forgetful, or that Ryan had been careless. Now, placed beside the insurance policy, the strange phone call, and the video from the porch, it all looked like a string of trials. Some attempts had failed. Some had been abandoned while he waited for a better opportunity. I felt sick when I realized how long it had taken me to call this fear by its real name. It wasn't marital trouble. It wasn't financial manipulation. It was the possibility that my own husband was trying to erase me. That afternoon, I drove to the police station with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The officer who spoke with me listened carefully enough, looked at the photos, took my statement, and told me to keep my distance and keep gathering evidence. But then he said, the one thing I had been most afraid of hearing, that what I had still wasn't enough for them to intervene in any serious way. It was all still circumstantial. They could make a report, they could increase patrols in the area, but they couldn't arrest Ryan or issue an emergency protective order based only on the pieces I had brought in. I walked out of there feeling like I was in freefall with nothing to grab onto. I knew I was right, but knowing it wasn't enough to save me. That evening, Ryan came home with a bouquet. He kissed my forehead, asked if I was tired, and even offered to make dinner himself. He said he had been too stressed lately, that maybe we should go away somewhere for the weekend to reconnect. That gentle tone of his had once been enough to soften me. That night, it made every cell in my body tense. I sat across from my husband, watching him cut my meat for me as if he cared, and all I could think about was the envelope on the camera footage. I had just set down my fork when my phone buzzed. Sarah had sent me a photo taken from a distance. Maybe she had asked someone to follow Ryan. I opened it and my whole body went rigid. Ryan was walking into a bar with Cole Bennett. But that wasn't what made my hands shake so badly, that I almost dropped the phone. The woman walking behind them was Laura Hayes, my former coworker, the one who had held me the day my father died, the one I had trusted completely. I stared at Laura's face in that picture, and for the first time, I understood that if she was part of this, then Ryan didn't just want to kill me. He had turned my entire life into a trap with layer upon layer. I sat in my car near the parking lot of my old company for almost 40 minutes, just staring at Laura Hayes' name on my phone screen without having the courage to press call. After the front door camera footage and the conversation I'd overheard between Ryan and that strange man, I started fitting together the pieces that had seemed harmless for months. Laura knew my work schedule almost better than I did. She knew which days I worked late, which days I stopped at the grocery store, and which days I was home alone because Ryan said he was busy entertaining clients. Once, she had even laughed and said, "You really live like a clock. It's easier to predict your schedule than the weather." At the time, I thought it was just a teasing comment between two women who used to be close. Now, looking back, it felt like someone was peeling the skin from my body, layer by layer. Laura had sat in my kitchen before, holding a hot mug of tea, listening to me talk about the times Ryan turned cold, the nights he deliberately made me feel small and useless. She looked at me with what seemed like genuine sympathy, or at least I had believed it was. That was why the pain wasn't really about her betraying me for money or for Ryan. The pain was that I had let someone know the weakest, emptiest places in my life, And those very hollow places may have been used to plan my murder. I didn't call Laura. I didn't confront Ryan either. I understood that if I let even the slightest unusual look slip across my face, Ryan would erase every trace he had left behind. That night, I acted the same as always, asking him if he wanted more soup, if he needed me to print anything for him. Ryan looked at me a little too long, in that way that made me feel like he was measuring how much I knew. I smiled at exactly the right moment, turned away at exactly the right moment, and kept my voice so steady that my throat started to burn. Around 10 o'clock, Ryan went into the bathroom. The moment I heard the water running hard, I moved quickly to his office. That room had always made it hard for me to breathe, too orderly, too sealed off, as if everything inside had been arranged so no one could touch the truth. My hands shook as I crouched beside the bookshelf and attached a small recording device to the underside of the side table against the wall. It only took a few seconds, but every sound in the house felt amplified, from the water hitting the tile to the creak of wood beneath my feet. By the time I had just closed the door again, the shower stopped. I had to lean against the hallway wall for a few breaths before I could keep walking without collapsing. The next morning, I used buying medicine as an excuse to leave the house, then sat in my car to open the audio file. At first, there was only the scrape of a chair, the sound of a glass touching the tabletop. Then Ryan's voice came through, so clear it felt like he was sitting beside me. He talked about a clean window, a location without cameras, and how, if staging it as a carjacking failed, they would switch to a domestic accident because it would look more plausible. I listened to every word with ice-cold hands. In Ryan's mouth, my life had become an item to be dealt with efficiently, an obstacle standing between him and the insurance money. Then I heard a woman's voice cut in, low and urgent. It was Laura. She said they shouldn't drag this out any longer, that it was going too far. Ryan cut her off in a voice as cold as metal, reminding her that she had taken the money and had already provided enough information that there was no turning back. There was a brief silence, and then Laura said, very softly, almost choking on the words, "You told me it was only to scare her into signing the papers." That sentence left me numb. Laura was not innocent, but she was no longer in control of the monster she had helped feed. From that moment on, the air in the house changed completely. Ryan started watching me more closely. He asked where I had gone, who I had met, and why I had been holding my phone so much lately. That evening, the moment I set my handbag down on the chair, he picked it up and searched through every compartment under the pretense of looking for his car keys. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching, my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. Late that night, he came into my room without knocking and said he was looking for some bank papers. His eyes lingered on my phone longer than normal. "Have you been hiding something from me lately, Emily?" His voice dropped lower, not loud, but pressing in the way a hand presses against a throat. I looked straight at him, trying to keep my breathing even. "What if I asked you the same question?" The corner of Ryan's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, and it wasn't anger either. It was the expression of someone deciding whether to keep playing the role of husband or show his real face. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated. An unknown number sent a message so short it felt cruel. "If you want to live, don't go home tonight." I looked up. Ryan was only a few steps away, and the house around me suddenly seemed to darken, as if it were closing in. For the first time, I understood that I no longer had time to be afraid. I had to decide immediately, stay and keep pretending I was safe, or disappear before it was too late. I left the parking lot of my former company with my mind spinning, and Ethan drove in near silence. He didn't say anything until we stopped on a deserted street, then turned to ask me how sure I really was. I handed him my phone and showed him the screenshots from the doorbell camera, the record of the strange call, the vague messages between Ryan and Laura that I had managed to photograph just before she deleted them. Ethan studied everything carefully, and his expression grew heavier by the second. When I mentioned the name Cole Bennett again, he tightened his grip on the steering wheel and said something that sent a chill all the way through me. "Cole isn't the kind who does the job himself. He's a broker. The kind who takes the money, passes along the message, and finds someone else to do it. That's even dirtier, because you won't know who's actually coming for you." I sat there, numb. Until then, Part of me had still clung to one warped sliver of hope that maybe I had misunderstood, that Ryan was only tangled up in something shady involving money. But Ethan's words erased every last shadow of doubt. If Cole was only the middleman, then this wasn't a burst of anger or some half-hearted threat anymore. It was a transaction. Someone had paid, someone had accepted, and the person being priced out was me. Ethan said we didn't have much time left. If Ryan was starting to suspect that I knew, the first thing he would clear out would be the paperwork. We had to go back to the house immediately, while he still believed everything was under control. I had never imagined that one day I would be trembling as I stepped into my own home like an intruder. Ethan stayed outside and kept watch while I opened the door with my familiar key, my hand feeling heavy as stone. Everything in the house was untouched in a way that felt almost cruel. Ryan's mug in the sink, his jacket draped over the back of a chair, the trace of his cologne still in the air. That normalcy made me sick. I went straight to Ryan's office. The safe was behind a framed painting on the wall, where he had once laughed and told me he only kept investment documents and tax contracts in it. I knew the combination because I had helped him pull out loan papers before. When the final number clicked and the lock released, my heart was pounding so hard I thought Ethan might be able to hear it from the doorway. Inside was a stack of newly updated life insurance documents, copies of our shared property registration, several envelopes of cash, and a thick, pale yellow envelope with my name written on it in Ryan's handwriting. I wanted to believe it was something from the bank, or anything that still held even a trace of humanity. But when I opened it, my hands almost went numb. Inside were photographs of me. Me in the supermarket parking lot, carrying grocery bags, my head slightly lowered. Me outside the pharmacy, digging for my keys in my purse. Me standing on my mother's porch with my back to the street. Some were taken from far away. Some were close enough that I could see the exhaustion on my own face. These weren't random pictures. This wasn't casual surveillance. It was a file on my life, my routines, the moments when I could disappear most easily before anyone had a chance to save me. At the very bottom was a folded calendar page. Several dates had been circled in black ink, but only one had been slashed hard in red. Beside it were a few cold, clipped abbreviations, written like notes for a business appointment. I didn't need Ryan to explain what it meant. It was the day he had chosen for my death. I heard Ethan step in behind me and then stop short. He didn't ask any questions. Maybe my face had already said everything. I stood there with the stack of photos in my hands, my whole body shaking, because the evidence was undeniable now. But it also meant the person who wanted me dead had prepared so thoroughly that he could strike at any moment if he found out I had seen them. After a night of barely sleeping, sitting with Ethan as we replayed every recording, studied every photo, and matched every timestamp, I understood we had reached the point of no return. What we had was enough to prove Ryan was no longer just a lying husband. But Ethan told me plainly that it still might not be enough to take him down in one decisive blow. Ryan was too good at playing the victim, too used to twisting the story in his favor. If we wanted to stop him at the root, we had to let him believe I was still within his control. The plan Ethan laid out made my stomach clench. I would agree to the weekend trip Ryan had mentioned before, to the isolated cabin outside town, the place he had once called perfect for us to start over. The second Ethan mentioned that cabin, I understood exactly why Ryan had chosen it. Far from people, far from cameras, far from neighbors, far from any chance of calling for help. A place where, if I disappeared, he could invent any story he wanted. Ethan looked at me for a long moment before asking if I was sure. I said yes, even though I could hear how frighteningly dry my own voice sounded. If I backed away now, Ryan would change tactics, something quieter, dirtier, and next time I might not get the chance to know in advance. Before I left, Ethan slipped a tiny tracking device into the lining of my purse, handed me a recorder thin enough to hide beneath the seam of my coat, and repeated our safety signal over and over. If I said the exact phrase we had agreed on, the police would move in immediately, if there was still time. If my signal disappeared for too long, they would come in under the backup plan. It all sounded airtight, but that thoroughness only scared me more, because it reminded me that one tiny mistake could send everything spinning out of our hands. Ryan came to pick me up the next morning wearing a gentleness I hadn't seen from him in months. He brought coffee, exactly the way I used to like it, asked if I'd slept at all, even opened the car door for me, as if he were trying to patch up a marriage that had only just cracked. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have softened at that version of him. The whole drive, Ryan revisited old memories in a low, warm voice, our first trip together, the first kitchen we ever rented, even the time I told him that as long as two people still loved each other, anywhere could feel like home. His hand rested over mine for a moment, long enough to seem sincere, light enough not to feel forced. I had to fight not to pull away. But threaded through those sweet words were icy little probes. Ryan asked where I'd been going after work lately, whether I still saw Laura, why Ethan had been in touch with me, and why my phone had been on silent so often recently. He asked softly, casually, as if he were only a husband taking an interest in his wife. I smiled just enough, answered slowly enough, and stayed exactly inside the role of a woman who was wavering but not fully awake yet. When Ryan said, "I just want us to start over," I kept my eyes on the road ahead and understood that in his mind, starting over might mean erasing the version of me that still existed. The cabin sat deep in a sparse stretch of woods, quiet enough that even the sound of the car door shutting felt like a warning. Inside, Ryan kept performing the role of the remorseful husband perfectly. He lit a fire, opened wine, and asked if I was cold. But every time his phone buzzed, he stepped off to some hidden corner, lowering his voice, turning his back to me. I didn't dare follow too closely. I poured every nerve into listening and waiting for the right moment. It wasn't until the third time he stepped out onto the back porch that I got close enough for the recorder to catch the whole sentence. "When it's done, send the rest. I don't want any more calls." I froze behind the cold wooden wall. There was no more ambiguity, no more suspicion or guesswork. Ryan was talking about my death the way someone talks about merchandise that's almost been delivered. His voice was so calm it was horrifying, clean, practical, as if all our years together had only been a contract waiting to be liquidated. I stepped back, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I sent the signal to Ethan immediately, but the screen showed only one weak, flickering bar. I tried again, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The message showed as sent, then just hung there without confirmation. Outside, the wind hissed through the trees. Inside the cabin, Ryan came back in wearing a composed smile, as if he had never said anything monstrous at all. Dinner unfolded in an atmosphere so tense it was hard to breathe. I watched him cut his meat, pour me more wine, ask if I wanted to stay here another day, while my mind kept circling that sentence I had heard. I knew I couldn't drag it out forever. If the police still couldn't get in because of the weak signal, then every extra minute I waited only made it more dangerous. And when Ryan brought up the insurance policy again, in that half-joking, half-serious tone, I set my glass down on the table and pulled out my phone. I heard everything, Ryan. He went still for a split second, then laughed as if I had said something absurd. I played the recording. His own words filled the small room, cold and clear and merciless. The smile on Ryan's face disappeared by degrees. His eyes changed completely flat, sharp, stripped of the polite varnish that had been covering them. "I thought you'd stay stupid a little longer," he said, his voice dropping. "You've been a burden, Emily. For a long time. Do you know the only thing you'd ever be good at? Dying, and finally becoming worth something." My whole body went cold. This was who he really was. No remorse, no hesitation, not one shred of conscience. I took a step back, trying to keep my voice from breaking as I brought up Laura, Cole, the insurance money, the phone calls, everything I knew. Ryan didn't deny any of it anymore. He just looked at me the way someone looks at a broken object, then curled his lip and said Cole had only been smoke, a trail he had deliberately left for me to follow. At that exact moment, the cabin door flew open. I spun around. The man standing in the doorway was not Cole Bennett. It was someone I had never seen before, big, expressionless, with eyes that held not even the faintest trace of hesitation. In his hand was something short, metallic, and rigid that made my breath catch. I stood frozen in the middle of the cabin, Ryan directly in front of me, the stranger behind me, and for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it felt like to ask yourself whether this might be the last second you would ever live. When Ryan stepped into the cabin and locked the door behind him, I knew everything had reached the final edge. His face was calm in a terrifying way, as if this were just a belated marital conversation, not the night he intended to end my life. I took half a step back, making sure my breathing sounded just broken enough. I couldn't seem to be composed. With someone like Ryan, the most dangerous thing wasn't his anger, it was his sense of victory. I looked straight at him and asked softly, "How long have you been planning this?" The corner of Ryan's mouth lifted. I saw immediately that I had struck exactly what he loved most, the feeling of being recognized as the smartest person in the room. Ryan moved closer, his voice low and cold. He said everything should have been clean and simple if I had just known my place, if I hadn't dug through receipts, asked about the insurance policy, turned myself into a problem that needed to be handled. I swallowed down my nausea and kept buying seconds. "So you hired someone to kill me?" I asked. Ryan laughed, and the sound sent ice through me. He didn't answer right away. He just tilted his head and looked at me the way someone looks at a slow child. "Do you really think I'm stupid enough to get my own hands dirty?" I kept my face panicked, but in my mind, there was only one goal: to make him keep talking. More. Give me more. Maybe he was too intoxicated by the feeling of standing above me, because Ryan started dropping pieces of the truth as if he were bragging about an accomplishment. He talked about the insurance policy, with a payout large enough to solve a lot of problems, about tracking my schedule for months, and about how he never contacted the person doing the job directly and always went through an intermediary. He never fully said Cole's name, but every detail matched what Ethan had warned me about. I asked him why. I needed him to say it himself. Ryan looked at me with disgust, as if I were the one who had forced him to become a monster. "Because you're not useful anymore," he said lightly. "You used to know how to stand beside me, smile at the right moments, stay quiet when you were supposed to. Then you started asking questions, started doubting me, started making me look bad." My throat tightened, but I still forced him to keep going. "So you think you're the victim?" I asked. That changed Ryan's expression instantly. He stepped closer, his voice sharp as a blade. "Yes, you should be grateful I gave you a decent life before you made everything complicated." He piled every wrong he had committed onto my shoulders, saying I didn't know how to protect my husband's image, that I didn't understand the pressure he was under, that I had left him with no other choice. That was the moment I saw the truest version of the man I had married. There was no remorse in him at all, only the warped ego of someone who believed another person's life could be converted into money and status. I edged back toward the small table, trying to touch the recorder I had hidden beneath the edge of the tablecloth. The phone signal inside the cabin was more unstable than Ethan had predicted, and outside it was so silent I could hear the wood creak beneath Ryan's feet. The police still hadn't come in, every minute stretched as steel wire pulled tight. Ryan seemed to realize I was trying to hold out. He grabbed my wrist so hard that pain shot through me, and demanded to know who I was waiting for. This time, I made myself tremble for real, partly from fear, partly because I knew one small mistake would bring everything crashing down inside this isolated cabin. Just then, the cabin door flew open. Laura appeared, pale-faced, hair disheveled, clutching another phone in her hand. I had thought she was there to save Ryan, but the first thing she said made both of us freeze. "I brought everything, the messages, the transfers, the draft emails you wrote to pin this on me. If it came out, I've already sent it all to the police." Ryan spun toward her, and for the first time, the calm on his face shattered. Laura kept going, her voice shaking but her body still rigid with effort, saying Ryan had already prepared the story for after my death. I would be turned into an unstable, cheating wife, a woman imagining a plot against her. She had only ever been a backup piece too, a mistress foolish enough to be used and then thrown out to take the blame. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, hitting the wooden walls of the cabin like a life-saving signal arriving too late. But at the exact moment I thought I had reached a way out, Ryan lunged at me, yanked me backward, and locked his arm around my neck, using me as a shield. His breath brushed my ear, calm, horrifyingly. While Laura screamed and flashing lights cut through the gaps in the woods, Ryan whispered one final secret that turned my blood cold. He said he had manipulated my psychological records months earlier, created enough paperwork that if I died, every accusation I had ever made against him would be dismissed as the delusions of a mentally unstable woman. And as the sirens drew closer and closer, I realized I had not won at all, because Ryan had just played his final card, the one that could turn me from the victim into the suspect on paper. The cabin door burst open just after Ryan clamped down on my shoulders so hard I thought my bones were about to crack. Shouts came fast, flashlight beams slashed across the room, and then the weight on top of me vanished all at once. I collapsed onto the freezing wooden floor, my ears ringing so badly I could only barely make out Ethan calling my name from what sounded like very far away. Ryan was still struggling, still yelling that I was unstable, that I had fabricated everything from the beginning, that all of this was just a trap meant to destroy him. But in that desperation, he said the one thing he should have taken to the grave. Ryan laughed, a dry, hollow sound, then looked straight at the police, as if he still believed he could control the entire room. He said he had been preparing for this for a long time, had carefully built an image of me as the perfect, fragile, erratic, easily provoked wife. He had contacted a counselor, he had kept emails. He had deliberately created notes, conversations, little text exchanges so that if I ever spoke up one day, my words would be doubted first. He thought it was his final way out. But when Ethan handed the investigators copies of the communications we had already tracked down, that meticulous preparation became the coldest proof of all that this had been planned, staged, intentional for a very long time, not some impulsive act in the heat of the moment. After that night, nothing wrapped up as quickly as it did in the stories people like to hear. The police traced Cole Bennett through layered transactions, calls made on burner phones, and brief meetings in parking lots Ryan had thought were discreet enough. Cole was arrested a few days later. Laura could no longer stay on the sidelines either. She agreed to cooperate, turning over the messages, the appointments, and even the details she had held back because she was afraid Ryan would turn around and bury her with the case. I did not forgive Laura. Some lines she had crossed far too completely. But her testimony helped reconnect the broken pieces, from the insurance policy to the plan to undermine my mental stability, to the story Ryan had already built in advance, so that if I died, he would still be the grieving husband crying beside my coffin. I survived, but there was nothing triumphant about the feeling of survival. In the days that followed, I slept in brief, broken stretches, like someone who had just escaped a fire while her hair still carried the smell of smoke. The sound of a phone ringing made me flinch. I stood in front of the mirror for long stretches, asking myself how I had ignored so many signs. I had called the control concern. I had called belittling remarks temporary pressure inside a marriage. I had blamed myself for being too sensitive whenever my instincts tried to warn me. What hurt the most was not only that Ryan wanted me dead, but that he had made me doubt my own perception for so long. Ethan was the first person to tell me something it took me a very long time to believe. Victims of manipulation are not stupid. They are bent little by little until they can no longer tell which voice is truly their own. I held on to that sentence the way you hold on to a railing in a dark staircase. Then, step by step, I began doing the things I had once been afraid of. I met with lawyers, severed the financial ties, reviewed every document Ryan had ever touched, stood in court, and called what happened to me by its real name. Not a misunderstanding, not a marital crisis, an attempted murder plot built with money, lies, and pathological arrogance. When Ryan was indicted, I did not feel the kind of total release people imagine. Justice did not give me back the months I lost, nor did it erase the filthy feeling of knowing that the man who had once stood in my kitchen, who had once poured my coffee every morning, had been able to calmly calculate what my death was worth. But it gave me back something more important: the right to trust the truth of my own experience. Now, when I look back, I do not call myself a woman who was almost destroyed. I call myself a survivor. Recovery is not beautiful. It is not straight. Many days are still full of anger and shame, but it is real. And if I learned anything from that wreckage, it is this. Sometimes the most dangerous person is not the stranger stepping out of the dark, but the one who once smiled at you under the kitchen light and told you they loved you.